Decisions and Choices, written by Mark Spruce in 2019, based on events from December 1978. The saying goes that we learn from our mistakes. Well, that depends on the person and the mistake, I suspect. Some mistakes I have learnt from, eventually. One mistake or error of judgment I made as a naive 17-year-old I've remembered my whole life. Looking back now, I can see that this mistake was the result of several decisions. Some good, and some most definitely not good. It is the winter of 1978, and I am coming to the end of my first term in the upper sixth form of the comprehensive school I've attended since the age of 11. After 6 years, I have finally reached the top of this particular pupil tree. There is no year above me. I am now a senior pupil, freed from the bonds of school uniform, a young adult. This story takes place on the last day of the autumn term, and the anticipation of Christmas was just around the corner. It might well have been the winter of discontent for some, but for myself, hidden away in Salisbury at that time, it was my winter of quite contented indeed, thank you. Aside from the usual angst and conflicts of teenage life, as I remember it, when I was with my mates, the world was generally doing just fine. On this particular day, we'd been asked as an entire upper sixth form, no more than 50 pupils, to leave school in the late morning and make our way down into the market square, where we would assemble on the steps of the library. Once assembled and led by our enthusiastic music teacher, we would heartily sing carols to the Christmas shoppers for an hour before being allowed to finish for the day. Most of my small group of male friends were not at all enthused by the prospect of singing in public, but on reflection there was the carrot of a free afternoon off school and the prospect of being able to mingle socially with some of the sixth form girls, who would no doubt be caught up in the general bonhomie of the Christmas spirit. Several lads had already agreed to attend, and after a small amount of consideration, I decided to go along with the group. This first decision was a good one. At 11 o'clock that morning, the upper sixth form en masse assembled from various directions at the steps of the city library. Organised into ascending tiers, my friends and I naturally slunk to the back of the choir. With minimal enthusiasm and volume, we joined in the renditions of several Christmas carol standards. I have vague memories that as the hour progressed, we gradually became more enthused with our singing. Our volume increased along with the appreciation of passing shoppers, and despite us trying to maintain an image of rebellious cynicism, we were all overcome by the all-pervading spirit of Christmas. Oliver's army was defeated by We Three Kings, and good King Wenceslas took precedence over Pretty Vacant. For the moment at least. Eventually, our choral duties came to an end. The rest of the day was ours. It was cold, we were thirsty, and we were all 17 and 18 years old. One of our groups suggested we retire to a town pub, and I decided enthusiastically to join them. This second decision was also a good one. Growing up and living in a village several miles from town meant I would travel in and out daily by contract coach to our school, located on the suburban council estate. As a young adult with very limited access to personal transport, I had relatively little experience at the time of town life and practically no experience of town pubs. Following along behind the confident lead of some of my urban fellow pupils, a group of around 10 of us made our way quickly past St Thomas's Church and over to the County Hotel. Those who went to the bar must have looked older than their years, and underage drinking laws must have been less rigorously enforced back then, as they all got served. We pooled our money and settled into the large snug that looked out onto the lower end of Fishton Street. This was all a new experience to me, and life felt particularly good at that moment, cheerful and exciting. I was asked what beer I wanted, and not wishing to look ignorant, replied nonchalantly, Oh, I'll have what you're having, mate. At the time, I knew very little about relative beer strengths. Beer was beer, and the letters ABV on a pump meant nothing to me. I was about to begin my beer education as my friend returned from the bar with my first pint of Wadworth's 6X. Allowing my friend to choose my beer was my third decision, and this one, on reflection, was quite a bad one. The next part of the story is a bit hazy, but I remember the atmosphere was wonderful. The jokes came thick and fast, intermingled with quotes from Monty Python and Not the 9 O'Clock News. We were mates together, enjoying our beer, our camaraderie, and our freedom from authority. The banter passed freely, and sometime around my third pint of 6X, the snow began to fall outside. The level of general noise and laughter in our snug had increased, and by now all my inhibitions, worries, and ability to make rational decisions had disappeared. Once a couple of hours had elapsed, some of the lads who lived in town gradually drifted away home, leaving me among the hardcore of experienced drinkers, as they like to consider themselves. By the fourth round, several friends had gone on to weaker beers, but I was feeling invincible, although I felt distinctly thick-headed. I was sure I could handle another and withstand any of the thinly veiled peer pressure of my more mature school colleagues. In retrospect, agreeing to that fourth pint of 6X was a very bad decision. Time was getting on, and one of the slightly more sober members of our group, conscious of bus timetables, suggested we ought to make a move home. We last few drinkers reluctantly agreed, and all of us piled out of the county hotel and onto the pavement outside. It was at that moment the icy cold winter air hit me. Warm fogginess rapidly changed to dizzy nauseousness, and I had to steady myself, holding on to a convenient drain pipe. Through the fog of alcohol, I somehow realised I was very, very drunk indeed. At this point, I could have headed with my friends unsteadily across the marketplace to the bus station, and with assistance got myself onto a Wilson Dorset red bus home. Fumbling in my pocket though, I realised I had spent all my money, and instead of asking to borrow some, I told my mates I was going to head back to school to get the free contract coach home. This decision was delivered in a slurred speech while still hanging onto the drain pipe. I had the outrageous confidence of one who does not actually have a clue of what he's doing. This was my fifth decision, and was without doubt the worst one of this story. Trying to recall now, I have absolutely no memory of how I got back to school that afternoon. It was a long walk along wet streets where snow had melted to slush. Somehow though, with the assistance of a couple of drinking partners, I found myself back at school about half an hour before the bus was due to leave. Avoiding teachers, we made our way around the back of the sixth form block and over towards the sports hall. It was at this point I became suddenly aware of a gnawing hunger. I'd eaten very little all day, which no doubt contributed to my state of inebriation. Right then, I got the munchies. I needed to eat something. Anything. With no money or any opportunity to buy food in school, I asked my friends if anyone had by chance a leftover morsel I could scrounge from their lunch boxes. The only item anyone could muster was a rather deflated tangerine. A citric fruit and a stomach full of 6X were never likely to make comfortable bedfellows, but I was starving, and any food was better than no food at that moment. I ripped off the skin and ate the tangerine in 2 swift mouthfuls. My hunger was not dispelled in any way, but shortly after my stomach began to feel very poorly indeed, and made a unilateral and completely natural decision to eject its contents over the sports hall wall. Eating the tangerine, as it turned out, had been yet another poor decision. So it was, I found myself bent over at the back of the sports hall, spitting out the last of my tangerine-scented stomach contents, whilst a mate steadied me from falling into the wall. This was certainly not the point I had imagined the day leading to when I had walked in high spirits into town that morning. Decisions and choices had led me to this point, and it was now I made yet another rather bad one. Having thrown up over the back of the sports hall, I felt worse than ever, and I desperately needed some tap water to swill out the disgusting taste from my mouth. A good decision at this point would have been to have remained discreetly out of sight of any teachers at the back of the hall, whilst getting a mate to bring me a cup of water from the sports hall changing room toilets. It was now barely 20 minutes until the school bell. I could have quietly slipped onto the school bus and hopefully slept off the worst of my awakening hangover on the back seat during the hour's journey home. Instead, I wobbled back around to the front of the building and almost fell through the double swing doors whilst knocking bemused first years out of the way like skittles. Accompanied by my two friends, I was heading for the changing room toilets and that refreshing water that was the only thing I could really focus on at that moment. However, with appallingly bad timing, the deputy headmaster then entered through the double doors at the other end of the corridor. There was absolutely nowhere to hide in the neon-lit, breeze-blocked corridor, and no possibility of running away. With barely 20 feet separating us, I backed up against the wall to steady myself, and my two more sober friends stood closely either side of me to make sure I did not fall over. The deputy head stopped in front of us as my two friends addressed him with a rather over-enthusiastic and over-loud, "Merry Christmas, sir!" The deputy head stopped to return their greetings and then fixed his eyes directly on me. I stared back, pausing for a moment, trying to form a coherent salutation. An inane grin spread across my face, and whilst breathing a pungent mixture of beer and tangerine fumes directly at him, I managed a rather slurred, "Hello, sir." The deputy head looked at me with despairing eyes, shook his head slowly, and in a quiet but authoritative voice simply said to my friends, "Take this boy home." This boy. This stupid boy. In that moment I was Private Pike, receiving my own withering dismissal from the deputy head's Captain Mannering. Somehow my friends got me onto my coach home, and I curled up on a rear seat, sobering up painfully and ashamedly as it made its tortuous journey back to my village. By the time the coach had finally reached its terminus, I was reasonably sober and able to wander down the path to my house. On reaching home, thankfully my parents were not yet back from work. I cleaned my teeth and then swiftly consumed 2 pints of water, along with a couple of aspirins. My head ached, and in that moment I made the bold decision never to get that drunk again. Sadly, my resolve to never make bad decisions after consuming a large amount of alcohol has had a few setbacks along the way. At 58, I'm still working on that one. Spruce Casts, an eclectic collection of anecdotes, reflections and stories by Mark Spruce.